think we'll get started. We're going to do what we're kind of calling a roundtable for HRD, which is everything we do, which is NeoGov, PMI, pay tables, compensation, classification, all that stuff. So if you have any questions, this is a great time that we can all kind of get together and have a discussion about it. And if you have some suggestions, the same thing. I'd like to, obviously I'm Tricia Bach, the Human Resource Administrator. Over on the corner, we have Matt Nagy, who is taking care of all the electronic equipment while he's sick. Over in the other corner is Jenny Wacker, and she is Policy Planning Special Projects for HRD. So she's going to walk around with the microphone. And I'll let everybody up on the table introduce themselves, starting with Tricia at the end.
Hi, I'm Tricia Flores, the Administrative Coordinator, and I recently took over Grievances and Appeals Coordinator as well.
Hi, Lori Abeda, recruitments, payroll.
Hi, I'm Stacy Romans. I'm the compensation analyst.
I'm Erin Williams, Agency Services Manager.
Susie Hoyt, classification. Susie Hoyt, classification, payroll, agency analyst.
Get closer.
Susie Hoyt, reclassification, payroll, agency analyst.
Alicia Glover, NeoGov Administrator, reclassification, payroll, agency analyst.
Marlene Dunn, NeoGov from the beginning to, I hope it gets on the web correctly.
Jared Hansen, I do a little bit of everything, I feel like, but PMI, compensation, payroll.
So I thought maybe the best way to start this off, unless there's instantly questions, we do have some questions from the box. I think there's a couple people on the panel that just want to give you kind of news and updates on what's going on. I know Alicia has some topics to discuss, so anybody who has topics, I think this is a good time to talk about it. So go ahead, Alicia.
Okay. So some of you may have already noticed that there is a fourth evaluation step in NeoGov, and it's simply called position filled. This was a way for us to change on an applicant's profile that a position has been filled rather than it forever staying agency reviewing applications. We thought that this might help with phone calls to you, to us. This doesn't relieve you of sending notifications. I know we're all busy and we don't always get those sent out as quickly as we'd like, but at least if they look at their profile, they would see that a position is filled. So that will just be done once you've hired the position. Just take all those applicants, move them to that step 4, and it will simply change the status of that job that they applied for to position filled. Also, you're going to see that we're formatting the MQs just a little bit differently. On a lot of the classifications or on the class specs, there are things under certificates, licenses, registrations that applicants don't necessarily have to be hired, and that seems to be a confusing point for applicants as well as us sometimes when we're creating those MQs behind the scenes. You know, it's like, so is that required for them at time of hire, or do they have 6 months to get it? So what we'd like to do is only put under those certifications, licenses, registrations, the things that are required to qualify for the position. Anything that is not required as part of the minimum qualifications. Sometimes there's like flagging certifications, things like that, that they have time on the job to get those, like either within the first 6 months or first year. So we'd like to move those things up to the notes section. So I may be contacting some of you to find out if certifications are required. And then we're going to try to get that. We'll keep working on that to get those cleaned up. We will also be sending out a new MOU to all HR who are in Insight for NeoGov. So it'll include this fourth step. It'll include, I have it right here. It will include sending out notifications. It talks about more than just forwarding of applications. That first MOU strictly dealt with forwarding applications, and this will include just a few more things, but nothing major. So we will be sending that out to everyone soon. And I just wanted to ask a quick question. I know that some agencies are having issues with undeliverable emails. Is everybody having that issue?
There are lots of yeses out there.
Okay, so an unusual amount versus what it was previously, maybe over a month ago. I think these probably have to do with email addresses that are Gmail. And we did get a notification from NeoGov about some kind of change that Gmail made. So our only other option is to have all those notifications. When they receive them, they're going to say that they're from governmentjobs.com. But on the notification, it's going to say any replies will go to whoever that analyst is that's sending it. I don't know if that's an ideal situation, but I know some won't be thrilled about that. But we are putting HR contacts on the postings now as well. So
So the ones that are getting the emails undeliverable, have you noticed whether it's Gmail only? No. Those of you who are getting a lot of them, most likely the bigger agencies, can you look at that and see if that's the main problem or the only problem? That would be great. I think that would be helpful.
yeah, if they are Gmail addresses, which I'm suspecting they are, we will have to change that over then to governmentjobs.com so that our notifications are getting to those applicants. Just beware, it will say on there that any replies to this email will be sent to, and it's the agency analyst name and email address, so. Okay? Any questions about any of those changes? Okay,
Okay, I think we'll go to PMI with Jared. You were,
All right. Wasn't prepared for this. But
sorry.
No, that's okay. So I know that as far as an update for the PMI goes, I'm not sure where we're at with the present phase, but I do know that everybody has seen the upgrade in the system and the different look. There might be a few bugs, I think, that we're working out, but for the most part, I think everything seems to be pretty operational with the process flowing correctly. We have underwent, for those that were not aware, a PMI continuous improvement initiative where we, since the PMI has been up and running for 6 years, 5 years, 6 years now, this last year we put together a committee comprised of many different agencies and many different representatives from agencies, HR, non-HR, like Doug pointed out earlier, where we kind of split the big committee into 3 different subcommittees. We had a scoring and design team, an administrative and rules team, and soon to be a training and communication team. So just to kind of give everybody an idea, I know that and I can speak for Brenda in this aspect, that things are constantly changing, constantly evolving. Well, we're going to hit you with some more changes, hopefully, here this next year. We've had a lot of feedback over the past 5 years related to, scoring issues and a number of other issues that have come up. But we've heard you. We've talked about it in the committee. The scoring and design team concluded its proposals and submitted some changes to the big committee, which were approved. Right now, where we're at in the process is we've made some changes to the personnel rules. We've created a performance management policy, and those are kind of working its way through the chain as we speak. So hopefully we have some more feedback for you regarding that project, but I am fairly confident to say that there will be changes. Just not quite sure at this moment to the extent of exactly how many, but there will be changes. So,
One of the changes that I think that we can talk about, because it all depends on if the personnel's rules go through. Right now, it's with the attorneys to look to make sure we're not putting too much in policy and taking them out of the rules. So, one of the things is, which I think I can talk about, is having the evaluation phase and the planning phase, a one-time sit-down with the employee. So you can get kind of 2 phases together and shorten that up. It makes sense to me when I'm sitting down with employees and talking about how they did in the last year to also start talking about what we'd like to see together in the next year. It helps, I think, with supervisors having to, okay, here's where we're going, here's your review, okay, let's wait for a little bit, now we're going to do goals. It seems like it fits together, so that's one area that we're looking at changing. And the scoring, I think, is the biggest issue that we've heard from HR, from employees, from supervisors. And I think that the scoring committee did a really nice job in getting that adjustment. I think Doug talked a little bit about his 1/3 of his score being PMI, whether you get them done on time, basically, is what it is. And that will be adjusted as well. So those are the kind of things that we're talking about changing. Nothing has to do with anything major in the rules, but we want to make sure that we're not taking too much out of the rules and going into policy. So that's kind of where it is right now. I think Tricia has a couple things as well.
Pretty loud, but I still probably need a microphone. So just a couple of things as far as the things that I do as an administrative coordinator. I'm usually the first one that sees AWACS and those types of things, and usually the last one to see the pay approvals before I send them back to you. But please be sure that everyone but the employee signs those documents before they come to us. So the AWACS and the PM20s and the pay approvals, everyone else should sign them but the employee. The employee should always be the last one. Another issue that we would like to just point, do not offer a position to an employee if you're asking above MPP prior to HRD approval. So make sure that you ask first and that you get Tricia's approval before you make that offer, because once the offer's made and they accept it, that's a binding contract between them, so we're kind of stuck there. As far as grievances and appeals go, please make sure that you're adhering to the timelines. They're not just for the employee. If an exception is needed to a timeline, even if both parties mutually agree, the request still needs to come down to HRD for Tricia to review and give her approval. Most of those requests are typically approved, but we'd really like to be kept in the loop too, because that way when later we're wondering why it's been several months and we're just getting it, and then we don't have that documentation that you both mutually agreed to a different timeline, we just already know. If you need an administrative review leave extension, please make sure that you send that to us at least a few days prior to the previous one's expiration date so that we have time to review that and send you a response. Please make sure you consult with HRD administrator prior to any involuntary reassignments. So anything big like that, you know, it's just double check. It just takes a phone call. We can discuss it, and Tricia's always here to help with that. And the last thing, oh, actually, I'd have two more things. Please send all discipline documents, anything, letters of reprimand, letters of expectation, all of those to the grievance email, which is the AI-HRD-grievance@wyo.gov. And then we already have them. That way, if something becomes of it, we already have that documentation. We don't have to ask for it. And the last thing, I think someone already mentioned that we will be sending out a survey probably in January of the grievances and whatnot that you've had throughout the year.
And I just want to touch base on the involuntary reappointment. The majority of agencies call down with the involuntary reappointment. However, it actually says it in the rule. I mean, if I wasn't completely aware of that until it came up in an OAH hearing. Well, one side is arguing that they didn't consult with HRD for the involuntary reappointment. The last thing I want to do is have a situation where something like that hangs up an agency or an employee, either way. So that's why I wanted to mention it here, because I'm not sure everybody is aware of that little tidbit in the rule. So if you're going to involuntarily reappoint somebody, most of you call because you try to figure out what the pay is. So that's generally because you don't necessarily want to take all the pay away and put them down for the involuntary reappointment. So just make sure you call and touch base. We'll make note of it, so if it ever becomes an issue, we note that you did have a discussion with us. So that was the whole involuntary reappointment. And the agency is not at fault. I didn't even realize it was in there that I had to look at that necessarily. So I just want to make sure that we don't have that come up again. So, alrighty. Anybody else have any notes? Okay, Stacy?
So it's not necessarily notes that I have, but one of the questions that I noticed that was taken from the survey that went out to everyone before the summit was how our market rates are determined. And I'd kind of like to just talk about my job throughout the year and how I determine rates that go to our comp commission that are passed on to the legislators and things like that. So we have a workforce report that's going to be coming out this year. That will be changed to the fiscal year. So it's going to be data supported from July 1st of 2017 through June 30th of 2018. The page behind me, is a page taken from that, and it's in short on how we determine market rates. It's not an easy process, but I tried to condense it down into as little steps as I can to kind of make it make sense, I guess I should say. So throughout the beginning of the year and running all the way up to our National Comp Association of State Governments conference at the beginning of October, I work on a process called benchmarking. So benchmarking by definition is a process that identifies jobs that are common throughout all industries and are used as reference points to make pay comparisons between employers within a geographic area. So what I'm looking at are jobs that match to our classifications in the Midwest and Western regions in the states of Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, North Dakota, South Dakota, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. So those are the states we're looking at when we're comparing the salaries and comparing jobs. So from this data, median salaries are identified for each executive branch classified job by referencing widely used salary surveys, such as Employers Council, which was formerly Mountain States Employers Council, the Wyoming Hospital Association, the National Comp Association of State Governments data, Comp data, and our newest addition is the Economic Research Institute, which supports several salaries all into one. So if you're looking at a job comparison, you're looking it up, that salary's coming up, and then it's a lot of salary data together to get that number instead of having to average everything out on numerous spreadsheets or things like that. So we're excited to have that as part of our research now. We also use specialized surveys through YDOT, actually the National Business Aviation Association, to produce market data for our pilots. And ASHTO is another survey that they share with us to get some of their information as well. So pay range midpoints for benchmark jobs are averaged to show a single value representative of the pay range median salaries of the jobs matched to executive branch benchmarks, and these are also averaged to provide a single value comparison. From there, we're then able to determine how far behind we are by subtracting the average executive branch pay range midpoint by the average market median, and then dividing that number by the average executive branch pay range midpoint. The process is tedious. It's extremely important to produce that data for our Comp Commission, our legislators, our governor's office, and we can't stress enough how much information we have submitted to try and adjust our pay tables and try to ask for money and see what we can do for employees. And I mean, that's my mojo, is being able to do something for employees and trying to get these passed through and whatever I can to make that work. So that's my job, day in and day out, is what I'm trying to do. That's pretty much everything I have.
As of our last Compensation Commission meeting, all the work that Stacy's done with the surveys, you're all fully aware that we're operating on 2014 market data that was actually collected in 2013. The last Compensation Commission meeting, the commission recommended to push forward a recommendation to the governor's office and legislature to adjust our pay tables. Stacy has taken all of her data and information and drafted a memo that has gone up to the governor's office. And so that's working its way through the processes now. Unfortunately, that already is old data. Stacy and I will be attending the conference, like she said, late September, early October, and we'll be running new data for the following month when we get back. So as we obtain that new information, and for the November Comp Commission meeting, we will once again be updating them to let them know how far or how much further behind we are from what we've submitted to them most recently in the governor's memo. So it is something that, even though we're not seeing moves, we're continually working on and trying to get an audience and let people know how important it is that we move these pay tables. So Stacy's working diligently on that as we speak. We did have some questions that everybody put out in the suggestion box, and I think one of them is kind of timely after Stacy's presentation. The question was, if we have the money and stay under MPP, can we give a current employee a pay increase? And the answer is yes and no. We have opened up the compensation policy, so there is definitely more of an avenue now for agencies to give employees raises. It still does have to go through the HRD administrator's review, since it is an exception to the comp policy. We do look at those, and I think we just wanted to point out what we look at in those. So one, we're checking to make sure there's funding available, and we are checking to see where it is within the salary ranges, but we're not just looking to make sure it's under the MPP. We're looking to make sure that it's equitable with the statewide averages, and unfortunately, since 90% of our employees are at the lower end of the pay tables, approving raises at the MPP or above is really skewing and causing equities with other agencies or other employees within the existing agency. So we start by looking at what the MPP is it under or above the MPP? We then look at the statewide average, so where our existing employees across the state are within that agency in relation to that market policy position. And then we look at factors such as what that employee's performance is, because we still want to maintain the integrity of the market merit matrix. So we don't want to move a meets expectation employee to MPP or above when some of the superior employees are still at the bottom of the pay table. So we're looking at years of service in the position, the performance of the position, and then we're providing that information to Tricia. So all of your agency HR analysts that you have, as those equity requests or salary adjustments get submitted, they're running all that data behind the scenes to pass on to Tricia with a recommendation of their approval and denial and why. So we definitely have the flexibility now with the comp policies open to look at those. And if you guys are thinking, or management or employees have asked to have theirs reviewed, before you even submit them, if you want to call down to your analyst, we can kind of give you an idea of where that employee fits in relation to everyone else to see if it's even something that you guys want to continue to pursue. So we'd be glad anytime those issues come up to walk through those with you guys.
And I think I want to address a little bit as well, because there's always extenuating circumstances. I mean, if you're in a situation, as you're well aware, if you have somebody who has a job offer, that's actually in the comp policy, so follow that policy. But even if you have extenuating circumstances, you know, we're not here to deny pay raises for people. The last thing we want to do is say no to all of these. We want everybody to get pay raises, actually. We want the entire state to get a pay raise. The problem is when you sit there and you look at an employee who's been here for 20 years, has superiors for the last 5 years, is in the same class as this employee who's been here for a year, is now going to be over MPP. It's not necessarily in your agency. Sometimes it is. It's in an agency next door. It's hard for us to justify doing that when we're all one employer. And so it doesn't mean we wouldn't do it. It just means that we need a little more reasoning for somebody going over MPP and leapfrogging over a lot of long-term employees. So I want to make sure that it's clear, because everything that we do at HRD, we try, I always say I'm a rule follower. That's basically what I did at the AG's office. It's what I do here. If there's an exception to the rule, it's for everybody. It's not just for one agency or another. If we make an exception, then that has to be an exception for the entire state. So, for example, I'm getting a little bit of grief on the not donated, but the bereavement leave. So, we've basically put out there that it doesn't make sense. When you look at the definition of immediate family member for bereavement leave, uncle and aunt are not on there, but great step grandparent is, but no great step grandchild. So the whole rule doesn't make sense. We've had situations where you have somebody whose uncle raised them, they just never adopted them, and they're not getting bereavement leave for that. So we have basically said aunts and uncles are good. As long as your director is okay with that, we're fine with that. That's for the entire state. So when we say we're rule following, I try really hard not to look at something to where anybody could come in, look at our decisions and say, she's favoring this agency over this agency. I try very hard not to do that. So if you come down to HRD and say, this is what we want to do, we are going to figure out a way to get it done within the rules. What we don't want to have happen is what happened in the past, where they're using the reclass as salary increases only. I think we have gotten away from that. So if you're sitting down and you're thinking, well, we'll send in a reclass, that's how we can get some money. Just send down a pay approval and explain why this person needs to have a bump in pay. It's likely, if it's reasonable, it's going to get approved. Because that's why the compensation policy was opened, in order to not screw up the classification system. So we're here to really help and not stop you from doing things. So I know there were twice in the last 2 weeks that I've heard that, well, she has it out for this agency. 2 agencies have said that, and it's frustrating because I don't have it out for any agency, and I don't have a preferential treatment for either agency either. I mean, I tick off my director as much as I probably tick off YDOT's. So I just want to make sure that we try our best to do what you want us to do within the rules. It may not be exactly the way that you wanted it, but we can get it done a different way within the rules. So bring it down. Even if you think it's not going to get approved, bring it down and we'll try and figure out a way to do it. Another question that was in the box, and we're gonna answer one of the exempt versus non-exempt question until tomorrow. At that wrap up, because we're doing the FLSA exemption testing tomorrow afternoon, so we're gonna talk about that after that at that roundtable, at the forum. tomorrow afternoon. So whoever had that question, it'll be answered tomorrow. Hopefully you're still here. What avenues the HR representatives have available when they are required to report directly to the director, and there's a disagreement or the concern directly involves the director. This is probably the toughest situation, I think, that HR managers can be in. Obviously, you have the avenue to come down to the Human Resource Division, and that's generally, a lot of times that's what I get, is HR people come in saying, what do I do? I'm in a difficult situation. My director wants me to do this or doesn't want me to do this, and I know that I have to. It's not an easy position to be in. However, I think that we have addressed it on multiple occasions in the last 3 years since I've been there, and I think coming down to HRD, it's a lot easier for me to bring it up to your director or to the management or administrator, because it may not be a director. Maybe you don't want to go to the director about one of his or her administrators. And I think that we've done it in a way that we can bring it up to the person and explain why or why not this is important to do, without really outing the manager or the employee. Sometimes there's really no way around it. I mean, if you're the HR manager and you feel you can't do something that your boss is telling you to do, and you come to me, then we're going to have to discuss how we're going to address it. So you come down, if you can come down to me and we can talk about it. I would say you could talk, and these guys can talk about it tomorrow too. You can always talk to your AG and explain the situation. That is helpful as well. So there's at least 2 avenues to go to. It's a difficult position to be in. I think there's some ways we could change some of that, but that's probably a discussion for another day. So right now, if you come down to our office or you go to the AG's office, somebody can help out and try to figure out a way to bring it up that doesn't put a spotlight on you. It's not easy, but sometimes we can talk about it and figure out how to do that. So does anybody else have any other questions about that kind of thing? I know that's definitely a box question, and I understand why. Go ahead. Did you have one? Okay. And I think the AG's office would probably agree that they could at least take the question and try to figure it out.
The final question that we had in the box from today was, are there any plans to bring back the HR commitment to excellence? It was a great program, and it would be wonderful for new HR staff as far as seasonal, getting seasoned in HR and those sorts of things. I'm not sure how many of you were familiar with the Commitment to Excellence program, but the Human Resources Division had put together a certification program for HR professionals where we met more frequently throughout the year in sessions like this and provided regular ongoing training that then credit hours were obtained throughout the course of the year, and at the end you obtained a certificate for going through the courses. We have talked about doing something similar to that. It was important for us to start here, getting back the annual conference. There's a lot of new faces, and we haven't networked and met with each other like this for quite a long time. And so I think if any of you are interested in that program or would like to come down to us with suggestions on what you would like to see or if you would like to help, we'd be very interested in that, because I think we are looking to do something like that again in the future.
And I think part of the problem is, are budgets. Nobody has budgets for training, and I know our director tried to get just, I think, $50,000 for training a couple years ago, and that was shot down pretty quickly. So like with this conference, we were able to put this together without having to have the agencies pay for it, fairly inexpensive. We're not bringing in people, we're using the expertise within the state, which I think is important. Basically, it's the room and food. So if we can do something like that for the Commitment to Excellence and get that back, I would be thrilled. So if you guys have ideas, definitely bring them forward. And it's something that I know that Aaron's wanted to bring back. Many of you know that I've been thinking about Kate a lot. The last couple months, as Doug told you, I did move across the street from Ann. I did not know that at the time. I sent a text to Ann and said, oh, I'm going to be in your neighborhood. And she's like, where? And I gave her the address, and she took a picture of it basically from her front yard, and it was my house. So that was accidental. Not that I would have changed my mind, but Kate lived right next door to her, and I've been thinking about her a lot because she really strongly felt that the community needed to be together, and I think that she would be very happy to see this going on today, so. And I do have a bear story too. If we have time, I'll tell it. Questions? Well, when Doug told me he had a bear story, I was like, I have a bear story. Because his bear story was similar to mine in that they're really, well, I moved to Jackson when I was 22 and from Pittsburgh with my sister. And I had spent time in Wyoming at least twice a year, every year since I was 2, because my parents had a condo in Jackson when it was affordable back in the 70s and 80s, and sold it at a terrible time. Should have held on to it. So we had spent a lot of time in Wyoming as kids, and we both decided we wanted to live in Wyoming. So it was only probably 3 months after we moved to Jackson that we decided to go camping in the spring up in the Grovants. And camping in Pennsylvania is a little different than camping in Wyoming because there's more stuff that can eat you in Wyoming. So we're tent camping at a national park and in Grovant, actually, at a Park Service campground. So it was just, you had water and fire rings. My sister continued to work, so she'd go to work and I'd hang out and fish and hang out and do nothing and camp. So it started raining and I was in my tent and I heard growling and snuffling around my tent, and I could see the shadow. And I was like, there's a bear outside my tent. And I'm alone and there's nobody around. So it's growling. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna die here and nobody's even gonna know. Carolyn's gonna come back and there's gonna be like, the tent's gonna be wrecked. So I'm terrified sitting in there, and I finally got the nerve to like go out and look around, and I see the black butt right outside the tent. And I was like, oh my God, it is a bear. And I didn't have my bear spray, it was in the car. And I'm in the tent. So I'm basically having a panic attack. And I look out again, it turns around, it's a black lab. So that's my bear story. So Doug's story of the bear that never happened and my story of the bear that never happened. Both bear stories. So any other question?
With the discussions earlier on the competencies and better defining those, and you look at how they factor into everything that we do. I mean, the discussions that was going on from the standpoint of recruitments and better defining those and all that kind of thing. Has there been any thought put forward to doing our minimum qualifications away from a time-based to a competency-based MQ? I think we're getting a little antiquated, in my personal opinion, in sticking with a time-based if we're going to really start putting some focus in on those competencies. And again, that ties into PMI and everything that we're doing from that perspective.
Absolutely. So with the presentation that Ann gave this morning, I mean, that's definitely something that's been in A&I's mind for a long time. And even when you were down in HR, we talked about doing a hybrid approach and kind of transitioning away from time-based minimum qualifications. We are starting to incorporate some of that in some of ours now. But I think for us, the hardest part is we wanted to tackle those occupational group every time we did an occupational study. We have been put on hold from doing those. So as another part of our request of things that are up with the governor's office, and I think we've been able to bring it up again most recently with this efficiency study that's going on, it is imperative for many reasons that HRD do occupational studies on the occupational groups, and we have a regular 3 to 5 year rotational schedule for all those families. because we are being antiquated and we're not keeping up with industry. And that's one of the things, an occupational study just isn't looking to make sure the classification's appropriate. We then do a pricing sheet and make sure the salaries are remaining competitive and appropriate. Exempt, non-exempt, which we'll hit on tomorrow, is also a part that we look at during those. And as well as we thought that would be a perfect opportunity to transition away from time-based minimum qualifications to competencies. And so we're really kind of putting on the pressure to get approval back to do those, because that's how, as many occupational groups as we have, we're going to have to do it one occupational group at a time. So that's our plan for how we're going to accomplish that. But yes, we eventually will get there.
And occupational studies are so important to get done, so we are kind of hammering that right now. I can't tell you how many times that I've gone to especially in A&I, because, you know, we go up in Leadership Academy. I went up to do a presentation. That's the first question I had from the trades group. When are we going to get the occupational study done? It's so important, especially for the trades group, to get that done. We have been kind of a thorn in the side trying to get that done. So hopefully we'll see something happen in the next month or two. One question.
Gilmore?
We'll just talk with Brian.
Oh, there's one over here.
Okay, so this is on NeoGov. When or is it possible we could get the onboarding piece to that? And has anyone else in the state looked at it and seen the little demonstration that's on the website?
We came, the budget is just incredibly frustrating. And we're always talking about, well, there's agencies out there that do have the money, so they're going forward and doing like their own onboarding. I understand that. I get why they're doing that. The problem is it's frustrating because then we end up with all these different components, and the efficiency study last fall commented on that. We came so close to getting an LMS for the entire state. So close that it's very frustrating that it's just a little bit of money that we were short. And HRD has a very large budget. Most of that budget, as you probably understand, is EGI. So my budget, I think, is $380 million or something like that a year. It's almost all EGI. So we have this little bit of money for HRD. And it's one of those, and that's why it's a double-edged sword with the efficiency study. And I'll be completely honest with you. I mean, the only way that I see that the efficiency study can make any progress is to get technology up to speed and everybody using the same technology. And I would love to have the onboarding in NeoGov. I wouldn't, even if it wasn't in NeoGov, it was just onboarding somewhere that, that we could use. The problem is, the only way I can see us doing it is if we build the agencies. We would have to build the agencies for their portion of the onboarding. That might be an option. Some agencies would be thrilled to do that. Other agencies have their own. So then we still have these piecemeal technology, and I think the technology has to be solved before any of this efficiency that A&M or the new consultant, whoever that may be, comes on board. Excuse me. I think that we have to figure out the technology before we can do much more with the efficiency, and onboarding is one of them. It's probably the main one. So we would be thrilled to be able to do the onboarding, but we just don't have the funds for it, and we're not sure that, and maybe we put a survey out to each director and find out if they're willing to spend a percentage of their budget on onboarding or an LMS. We came real close to the LMS, which is frustrating, but, so I don't know. I think that the efficiency study might dictate some of that next year. I think Ann had a question.
Yes, okay, so I wanted to ask this question because I actually asked to change my presentation. And so here is the question. Tricia Bach. Tricia, would you please explain to us in the room what a hostile work environment is? Thank you.
And what it is not.
And what it is not.
I think that the panel tomorrow will actually probably have more input from the attorneys. The main thing I would say is that everybody thinks it's a hostile work environment because it's hostile. It's hostile to me, so it's a hostile work environment. That is not a hostile work environment. There are specific things that go into a hostile work environment, and one of them is a protected class issue that I will have the AG's office talk tomorrow on. But as soon as somebody says they have a hostile work environment, you're going to have to look into it no matter what. So the AG's office will tell you that. I'll tell you that. If they say those words, you got to look into it. The majority of the time, it's somebody being mean to me, somebody's not nice, you know, that type of thing. Sometimes it's valid, but that's the problem. You have to look into it. So hostile work environment is a discussion for tomorrow, too, as well. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll make Sue and Liz talk about it because they're the experts. Just leave it with them.
I guess since we're a large agency, we have a lot of questions. Is that what it is? And this kind of goes back to the grievance and appeals process and that kind of thing, and I know I've stubbed my toes a couple of times here. But from the standpoint of tracking, has there been any thought put into doing more of the Google shared documents rather than having to worry about always sending an email or a memo to get approval in that? Is there a way that we could simplify that process through some kind of, you know, everybody's going, well, it seems like the state's going more and more towards the Google side of that, and maybe there's a different way that we could do that to ensure that we're meeting our timelines and that type of thing for approvals?
I do think, and Tricia and I have talked about this, and it's a matter of making sure that everything is secure. I think it's working really well for the exception requests. You just shoot it in the Google email, and on our side, you don't even see it on our side. It goes into a sheet, and it's wonderful. Is anybody here from ETS? There's not, is there? No. The problem, the only concern I have is that next year, whoever's governor, we're using Google. Pretty sure we could probably still use Google no matter what, but I am concerned of the sharing aspect, the inadvertent sharing to somebody else. But I don't know how that's any different than you sending an email to the wrong person. So I think that's something, Tricia is much more schooled in Google than I am, and she has been able to do surveys for A&I. The surveys that you see go out for our customers, like how is HRD doing, how is general services doing. Tricia and Russ, when Russ was at A&I, basically developed that. So we have the right person in that spot to try to automate that, and we've talked multiple times about it, because I don't like signing them either. I mean, I would much rather be like, it's fine, because generally speaking, if you ask for it, we're approving it. I very rarely deny any extensions for, I don't think I've ever denied an extension for a disciplinary committee. I think I've tried to deny an extension for administrative review leave that was on there for 7-8 months, so somebody had almost a year vacation. That kind of irritated me, but it's hard to deny those because they're not done with the investigation, so it's generally, they're always going to be approved. So we will try to figure out a better way to do that, and we have talked about it through the Google system. As long as ETS can say, yeah, it's going to be secure. So there have to be more questions. Nope.
My question is on policies. In talking with some folks here today, we talk about, well, my agency does this, my agency does that, and there's no consistency. One of the things that came up today was the wellness program. Do you guys have a wellness program? Do we have a wellness program? Sometimes you hear yes. The answer is always different about how those employees are rewarded. Are you guys going to take on some of those policies and make them the same for every agency?
Yes, short answer. I'm going to let Erin take that one. You get to talk.
Yes, that would be my ultimate desire, is to get groups together and come up with a statewide wellness policy for every agency, because that is the hardest part for me reviewing those. They are all over the place. And so then you see a really good policy that you wish that the other employees or agencies that have submitted one would have the same opportunities. And so I would really like to get together committees going forward for the wellness policy. And you know, teleworking, we're going to look at our telework policy. We have a really archaic telework policy that's extremely outdated. Telework is kind of the wave of the future. A lot of agencies are doing it. We even got asked by the legislature why we limit the number of days, because they even thought we were a little too harsh and only allowing 3 days of telework. And so I think there's quite a few policies going forward that we're definitely going to ask for agency participation in. And I would love to see a statewide consistent wellness policy, because it's extremely hard to review from our perspective. And we have just these agency free-for-alls where agencies have policies that are all over the place. Then employees go from one agency to the next, and they're calling us wondering why they can't do the same thing that they did at their previous agency. And it just leads to a lot of inconsistencies. Or my husband works at one agency and he gets to do this, and my agency won't let me do that. And so absolutely, we would love to have a shared services model for all of those, what are now currently individual agency policies, and work, like Tricia said, we're all one employer, that we put teams of collaborative teams together to address these and have one statewide policy for everybody.
And that's kind of the overall arching question to you guys. We have all these different policies. Each agency has a different policy. Some have no policy. Donated sick leave is a good example, because it's such a mess across agencies, where you go from one agency to another and all of a sudden you're not allowed to get donated sick leave at this one, but you could at your last job. The question to you guys is, how would you like to see that change? A shared services model is something that would help with those competencies, being able to share those across agencies, policies that are all the same. It makes sense, but it's also a big change. And so I'd like to know what you guys think about it, if you've thought about it, on how you would feel about, say, YDOT has a policy for, I don't know, something, donated sick leave, because you guys have a good donated sick leave policy. Other agencies have no policy and they don't do donated sick leave. How is that agency going to feel if they have to do what YDOT does? It's a difficult question to tackle. Go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment, is that we all do such unique things sometimes, you know, and like for us and our staffing issues, you know, if we allow, you know, too much time, then that creates other problems for us, you know. So, you know, we cap our sick leave donations, you know, where other agencies may not, but we have a reason that we cap them, because, you know, we have to staff our prisons and we have all these other issues that can affect that. So I like the idea of having consistent ways that we treat all state employees, and there's also going to have to be that balance or flexibility that agencies can apply things to meet their needs as well. And so I think that's going to be tricky when we talk about how are we going to make this happen, or if we do something that's going to create an unfunded liability. You know, corrections might be able to absorb that, but a small agency may not. So there's just a lot that we'd have to consider as we walk through that.
The one thing that I think a lot of executive teams or administrators and directors forget, a lot of them, when we went around and talked about the changes in the personnel rules, and donated sick leave consistently came up, and it was pretty much half and half. Some directors didn't want it, others directors thought it was great. directors thought donated sick leave was great. One of the things I think they didn't think about is, say that one of the custodians at A&I is ill and needs donated sick leave, and I donate, and Kevin Hibbard donates, and Brian donates, and that gets rid of some sick leave out of a higher hourly rate. They don't think of it that way as much as they do. What? So a lot of the administrators didn't think that way, and that came up quite a bit, and they actually started rethinking it, because you're getting rid of at least some of that sick leave that's paid out much higher than that custodian is bringing home, which is a good thing all the way around. So, and I know, you can't do, we just went through this issue with DOC to find out, somebody complains because somebody else gets more donated sick leave at YDOT than they do at DOC. Well, there's a good reason for it. And here's the reason. So that's the hard part with making policies across the board. There has to be exceptions for different situations. So that's something to think about when we are trying to get some kind of semblance of a group policy.
If you do come up with a policy, can we also come up with a policy on how it is put into and taken out of in the payroll system?
That's not me. I can barely get into the payroll system.
Yes, that is one of the biggest concerns, because nobody knows if it was really drawn out and who it's going to, and there's no tracking mechanism, and that's something that we'd have to work and include. So when we put those committees together, we'll definitely have someone from the state auditor's office work with us on that so we can address that piece as well.
I think when it comes to something like donated sick leave, I can see how one policy for all agencies would make sense, but when we're talking about something like a wellness program, doesn't necessarily need to be just one policy, possibly a number of options for agencies to choose from.
That's
All that
definitely,
you're
that's
acceptable.
definitely something to think of. Those are the things that we need to have brought up and collaborate between the agencies, and I think this environment is perfect for it. There are the wellness policies / exercise programs / all the different things that agencies do, some outside the rules, but there's some agencies out there that allow employees to exercise an hour a day or 3 hours a week or whatever that is. I think every agency would love to be able to offer that to their employees. I don't think all of them could. Those are the things that end up coming down to my office, and we sit there and say, okay, well, how do we get this across the board? How do we say they can do it, but other people can't? The policy issue is a big issue, and I'm not sure everybody realizes how many complaints we get on policies that are different from one agency to another. And I see why. The employee doesn't care that YDOT and audit are two different employees or two different agencies. They get paid by the state of Wyoming, and they should be able to get the same benefits that the people at YDOT do, or vice versa. They want the same. What's that? No, you're just sitting there. So it is a difficult area, but I would like to get. I mean, we always talk about getting committees together, but that's basically what it is. And I think HR is where we need to do it, is to sit down with people who know what the employees complain about, know where the policies are at issue. And I think if we all got together, we could come up with at least some decent policies. And maybe it's a wellness policy. You can choose between 1, 2, or 3. That might be an option. And that's something to think about. We're here to hopefully facilitate that discussion. And make sure that all agencies are represented. So hopefully that's what we're able to do with that. And we'll look into that, and maybe that's something we will do in the near future. We all have a little bit of change coming up in the next 6 months or so. So we'll see what happens in the next 6 months, and by then there will be an efficiency, whatever they're called, consultant. I don't think they've picked it yet. If they did, nobody except the commission knows that right now. So there'll be some interesting things coming down, and we'll have a new governor. We'll have a new governor's staff, so there'll be a new chief of staff, all of that. So there's a lot of changes possibly coming up, and with change, I mean, I like change, but I know a lot of people don't. There's opportunity to make some changes in all of the agencies, and maybe policies and occupational studies and pay tables are the top 3 things we need to talk about. So, and maybe you guys can say what the top 3 things you think need to be talked about as well.
Just an additional comment on that. I think you're always going to have differences by agency. To carry that point one step forward, you're going to always have agencies that might pay a particular position at the minimum of the pay range, and you could have another agency that pays the exact same classification at the MPP. So your agency directors are still going to want to have that flexibility to make their own decisions. So the policies might be in the same grouping.
I do think that might be, directors may or may not be interested in having the same policy. Now, I think that paying at the minimum and then paying at the MPP, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, and it's consistently brought up, is, well, if I hired this person outside, I could pay him at MPP, and I don't have to go through you. And, yep, that's true. But if we're trying to keep everything intact and trying to keep the pay tables intact, that type of thing, then we need to have some semblance of, if you're a BAS 07, that you're paid pretty much within this range, and if you've been here for 20 years, you should be paid higher than the rest of the people who have been here for 20 years. I mean, that's kind of how we look at it. It doesn't mean that it always works out that way, and the comp policy is opened up so directors can have control. We want the directors to be making those decisions, or the administrators, and we don't want to stop that. So, for example, with the staffing study that we just went through, the report that comes out at the end of the day, at the end of tomorrow, will be essentially written by the agencies, so that they had a voice in this report. Specifically, their voice is in that report. The last thing we want to do is tell you how to staff your agency. I don't know how you staff WIDOT. I don't know how you staff audit. We have a good idea of employee data, but not necessarily what you need to do your job and what you need to do your programs at DFS or at Health or at Department of Corrections. It's the same idea for almost everything with HR. The directors need to have control over what their departments are doing along HR lines. So we get that, and we certainly don't want to be in a situation where we're trying to change that in anywhere and make you do a policy. That's why the policy discussion is hard when you try to talk about having policies statewide. It's easy with ethics. There's an executive order on ethics, that's easy. Workplace violence, that's easy. It's when you start getting into the details that it's harder. So I get that. Any more questions? No complaints about exception requests? When are we going to stop that? I figured that was going to be one of the first ones. Because we want to stop it. All righty. Well, tomorrow's Friday. We dress down on Friday, so we're dressing down tomorrow. We hope everybody dresses down tomorrow.